She was 8 years old when she walked 3 miles through the Texas heat, carrying nothing but her dead father's motorcycle key, to beg strangers in leather vests to save her dying mother. Harper stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow, painful movements that sounded like drowning on dry land. Each breath was a battle her mother was losing. The morning sun blazed through the thin curtains, already brutal at 7 a.m., promising another day of oppressive heat that would settle over everything and refuse to let go. But the heat wasn't what made Harper's chest feel tight. It was the sound, or rather, the lack of sound. Her mother's breathing had changed overnight. It was raspy now, wet, like something was breaking inside with each attempt to pull air into lungs that wouldn't cooperate. Her mother tried to sit up, failed, tried again. Her arms shook with the effort before she collapsed back onto the sweat-soaked pillow, eyes squeezed shut in frustration and pain. She didn't even have the strength to get out of bed anymore. Harper didn't say anything. What could she say? They'd been fighting this battle for 8 months. Her mother had been strong for so long, working double shifts at the diner even when she felt awful, smiling through the exhaustion, promising Harper that everything would be okay. But things weren't okay. They hadn't been okay for a long time. Harper walked slowly to the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the worn linoleum. The pile of papers on the table seemed to have grown overnight, multiplying like some cruel magic trick. Medical bills with red stamps across them. Final notices. Collection letters threatening legal action. And there, right on top, the eviction notice. 14 days. That's all they had left. 14 days before they'd lose the only home Harper had ever known. She touched the edge of the notice, her small fingers tracing the bold letters. Final warning. Her mother had tried to hide it under the other papers, but Harper had found it 2 days ago. She hadn't said anything. What was the point? There was no money. There were no options left. They'd sold everything they could sell. Her mother's jewelry, the necklace Harper's grandmother had left her, the wedding ring from Harper's father, the television, the nice furniture, the dishes that had been in their family for generations. All of it gone, fed into the endless hungry mouth of medical debt that never seemed satisfied, that only grew larger and more threatening with each passing week. But there was one thing left. Harper turned and looked out the kitchen window. There, sitting in the driveway under a faded blue tarp, was her father's Harley Davidson. The last piece of him they had. The bike he'd loved more than anything except his family. The bike her mother couldn't bring herself to sell. Even when the bills started piling up. Even when the food ran low. Even when the eviction notice arrived. The Harley remained untouched, a sacred memorial under its protective covering, gathering dust while their world fell apart around it. It was a beautiful machine. Harper didn't know much about motorcycles, but she knew her father had spent every spare moment working on that bike, polishing the chrome until it gleamed like liquid silver, adjusting the engine until it purred like a contented cat. He'd sit out there for hours, and sometimes Harper would bring him lemonade, and he'd lift her up onto the seat and tell her stories about the open road, about freedom, about the brothers he used to ride with before Harper was born. That bike was sacred. It was memory made metal. It was the smell of her father's leather jacket and the sound of his laugh and the feeling of being safe in his arms. But her mother was dying. Harper made a decision that morning that would bring 250 strangers roaring down her quiet suburban street. She walked to the small drawer where her mother kept important things. Keys, documents, photographs of happier times. And there, on a worn leather keychain, was the key to her father's Harley. Harper picked it up. The metal was cool and heavy in her palm, heavier than it should be for something so small. Or maybe that was just the weight of what it represented. The last connection, the final goodbye, the end of before and the desperate gamble on after. She closed her fingers around it tight. Her mother would be furious if she knew. Her mother would cry and say they'd find another way. But Harper had heard her mother crying in the bathroom last night when she thought Harper was asleep. She'd heard her mother on the phone with the hospital, begging for more time, promising to pay, her voice breaking with each word. There was no other way. There was no more time. Harper was 8 years old, But she understood something that morning that most children never have to learn. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes sacrifice is the only choice left. Sometimes a little girl has to become the adult because the adult can't do it anymore. She slipped the key into her pocket and walked back to her mother's room. Her mother was asleep now or unconscious. Harper wasn't sure which anymore. She leaned down and kissed her mother's burning forehead. "I'll fix this, Mama," Harper whispered. "I promise." Then she turned and walked out the front door, heading toward the sound of distant motorcycle engines, clutching her father's key like a lifeline, with no idea that she was about to walk into the arms of men who would change everything. Harper stood on her front porch for a moment, looking back at the small house that held everything she knew. She needed to leave something, some explanation, some reassurance that she wasn't just running away. She found a scrap of paper and a pencil on the kitchen counter. Her handwriting was careful, the letters large and uneven the way a child's writing is when they're trying their very best to be understood. "Mama, I went to get help. I'll be back soon. I love you more than the whole sky. Harper." She drew a small heart at the bottom and placed the note on the pillow beside her mother's head. Then she walked out into the Texas heat with nothing but her father's Harley key, wearing a faded pink t-shirt and jeans that were a little too short because she'd grown since last summer, and there was no money for new clothes. She'd heard the motorcycles the night before, distant thunder rolling through the evening air. Her father used to talk about the sound of Harleys in a pack, how you could feel it in your chest before you heard it with your ears, how it was like a heartbeat. "The heartbeat of the road," he'd said. Last night, lying in bed, listening to her mother's struggling breaths, Harper had heard that heartbeat in the distance. And she remembered something her father had said once. Something about brothers. Something about family on the road. Something about people who never left one of their own behind. She didn't have a plan exactly, just a hope, a desperate, fragile hope that whoever was making that sound might understand, might help, might see a little girl with her father's key and recognize that she was offering something sacred. So Harper followed the sound. She walked down her street, past the neighbors who were just starting to wake up, past the corner store with the faded awning, past the church with the broken sign. She walked in the direction of that distant rumble, letting it pull her forward like a rope she couldn't see but could feel wrapped around her heart. The Texas sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight. Sweat soaked through the back of her shirt. Her throat went dry. She hadn't thought to bring water, hadn't thought about much of anything except moving forward, following that sound, finding help. Her shoes were old sneakers, hand-me-downs from a cousin, and the sole on the left one was coming loose. It flapped with each step, a rhythmic slap against the hot sidewalk. Slap, step, slap, step. The sound became a metronome, marking her progress, marking time, marking the distance between desperation and hope. She had no idea the men she was walking toward knew her father's name by heart. After the first mile, Harper had to stop. There was a bus bench under a scraggly tree that provided about 6 inches of shade. She sat down, her legs aching, her feet burning inside the worn sneakers. She pulled the key from her pocket and stared at it. The leather keychain was worn smooth from her father's hands. How many times had he held this same key? How many rides had started with the turn of this small piece of metal? She thought about turning back, going home, crawling into bed next to her mother and pretending everything was fine. But then she remembered the sound of her mother's breathing, the rattle in her chest, the way she couldn't even sit up anymore. Harper stood up and kept walking. The second mile was harder. Her legs felt heavy. Each step took conscious effort. The heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, making the world feel liquid and unstable. A car passed her, the driver glancing over with concern at the sight of a small girl walking alone in the brutal heat. But they didn't stop. Nobody stopped. Harper didn't expect them to. This wasn't their burden to carry. She counted her steps, sometimes to distract herself from the pain in her feet. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes she sang songs her father used to sing to her. Old country songs about the road and freedom and finding your way home. Her voice was small and thin against the vast Texas sky, but it kept her company. It reminded her why she was doing this. By the third mile, the sound of motorcycles was getting louder, closer, more distinct. She could hear individual engines now, not just the collective rumble. Her heart started beating faster. Whether from hope or fear, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. Her shoes were covered in dust. Her face was flushed red from the heat. Her hair stuck to her forehead in sweaty strands. But her hand never let go of that key. Her fingers were cramped from holding it so tightly for so long, but she didn't loosen her grip. This key was her ticket, her bargaining chip, her last chance. The motorcycle sounds were coming from a building up ahead. A low, sprawling structure with bikes parked out front. Lots of bikes. More bikes than Harper had ever seen in one place. Chrome gleaming in the sunlight. Leather seats. American flags. And men. Dozens of men in leather vests and worn jeans, standing around talking, laughing, working on their machines. Harper stopped at the edge of the property. Her courage, which had carried her 3 miles through the Texas heat, suddenly faltered. These were big men. Rough men. Men with long beards and tattoos and expressions that looked hard until you got close enough to see the lines around their eyes from years of squinting into sun and wind. But she'd come this far. She'd walked 3 miles. She'd left her mother alone and dying. She couldn't turn back now. Harper took a deep breath, wrapped her small fist tighter around her father's key, and walked toward the Hells Angels Texas chapter clubhouse. The Hells Angels Texas chapter clubhouse sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by more motorcycles than Harper could count. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the presence of so much chrome and steel and raw power. Some of the bikes were being worked on, tools scattered on the ground beside them. Others gleamed in the sunlight, polished to mirror perfection. Their owners standing nearby with rags in hand, making small adjustments that probably didn't need to be made, but gave them an excuse to be close to their machines. The men themselves looked exactly like what Harper had expected and nothing like it at the same time. They were massive, most of them, broad shoulders straining against leather vests, arms covered in tattoos that told stories Harper couldn't read but could feel the weight of. Long beards, some gray, some still dark. Bandanas and sunglasses. Boots that had seen 1,000 miles of road. They looked dangerous. But Harper didn't have the luxury of being careful anymore. She stood at the edge of the property, frozen. Her feet had carried her 3 miles, but now they seemed rooted to the ground. Her courage flickered like a candle in the wind. These men were laughing, talking loudly, their voices rough and deep. One of them was telling a story, his hands gesturing wildly, and the others were cracking up, the sound of their laughter rolling across the yard like thunder. Harper's hand was still wrapped around her father's key. She could feel the grooves of it pressed into her palm. She thought about her mother, about the sound of her breathing, about the eviction notice, about having come all this way for nothing if she turned back now. She took 1 step forward, then another. Her worn shoes crunched on the gravel. The sound cut through everything. In an instant, every conversation stopped. Every laugh died mid-breath. Every head turned in perfect unison toward the small figure walking toward them. An 8-year-old girl, dusty and sweaty, her face flushed from the heat, her clothes worn, her shoes falling apart, walking into the heart of a biker clubhouse like she had every right to be there. The silence was absolute, complete, the kind of silence that feels heavy, that presses against your skin, that makes time seem to slow down and stretch out. Dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on Harper, some curious, some confused, some concerned. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just watched this little girl walk toward them with determination written across her small face. Then one man stepped forward. He was older than most of the others, his beard more gray than black, his face weathered by years of sun and wind and road. There was an authority in the way he moved, a quiet command that made it clear without words that this was the man in charge, the president of the chapter, the one the others looked to. He walked slowly toward Harper, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. When he got close enough, he crouched down to her eye level, his knees creaking slightly with the movement. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly gentle. "Sweetheart, you lost?" Harper shook her head. Her throat felt tight. Her voice, when it came out, was smaller than she wanted it to be, trembling with exhaustion and fear and desperate hope. No, sir. I want to sell my daddy's Harley. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out past the lump in her throat. I need money to help my mom. She's sick. She's real sick. And I'm too small to bring the bike here, but it's at my house. It's a good bike. My daddy took real good care of it. The president's eyebrows rose. He glanced back at the other men, several of whom had stepped closer, forming a loose semicircle around the small girl. Their faces showed a mixture of emotions: sympathy, confusion, respect for a kid brave enough to walk into their territory asking for help. The president looked back at Harper. His voice was careful now, measured. Where's your daddy, sweetheart? Why isn't he here? Harper's eyes dropped to the ground. He died 2 years ago. It's just me and Mama now. And she can't work anymore. And the bills. Her voice broke. She stopped, took a breath, steadied herself. 8 years old and already having to be so much braver than any child should have to be. The president was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that would change everything. What's your daddy's name? Harper looked up at him. She said her father's full name clearly, proudly, the way children do when they're honoring someone they love. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The president's face went completely white. The color drained from his cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. His eyes went wide, then wider. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Behind him there were gasps, sharp intakes of breath. One man actually stumbled backward a step. Another's hand flew to his mouth. The silence that followed wasn't like the first silence when Harper had arrived. That silence had been surprised, curious. This silence was shocked, heavy with recognition and disbelief and sudden, overwhelming emotion. This silence hurt. Men who looked like they'd never been scared of anything in their lives looked scared now. Not of danger, not of violence, of grief, of loss, of a ghost suddenly made real in the form of a small girl holding a motorcycle key. The president's hands were shaking. He pressed them against his knees to steady them. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely above a whisper, hoarse and broken. Kid, your daddy rode with us. The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind him, men were starting to murmur her father's name, saying it over and over like a prayer or a curse or both. Some of them had tears in their eyes. These hard men, these rough men, these men who looked like they'd seen everything the world had to offer and hadn't blinked. They were crying. We lost track of him, the president continued, his voice steadier now but still thick with emotion. Years ago, he just disappeared. We looked for him. God, we looked. But we never. He stopped, shook his head. We never knew he had a family. We never knew he had a little girl. Harper's eyes were wide. You knew my daddy? Knew him? The president let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Sweetheart, your daddy was one of us. He was a brother. We rode together for years. His voice broke completely. He looked at the men behind him and something passed between them. An understanding. A decision made without words. One biker, a man with silver running through his black beard, put his hand over his heart like he'd been struck. Another closed his eyes and tilted his head back toward the sky, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer. I remember when he first prospected, one man said, his voice thick. Kid was scared as hell but wouldn't show it. Had more heart than sense. Remember that ride to El Paso? Another added. Storm came out of nowhere, and he kept us all together. Nobody got left behind. That was him, someone else offered. Always making sure nobody got left behind. The memories came flooding back, each man adding a piece to the puzzle, rebuilding a picture of Harper's father that she'd only known as Daddy. They knew him as brother, as road captain, as the guy who always had your back, as the man who could make you laugh when the road got hard and the nights got long. The president turned back to Harper. His eyes were red-rimmed now, glistening with tears he was too proud to let fall but couldn't quite hold back. "Your daddy was one of us, little one. One of the best of us. We rode together for 5, maybe 6 years. He was there when I patched in. I was there when he earned his full colors." The president touched the patch on his own vest, the skull and wings. "That means something. That means everything. It means your family for life. It means your brothers will die for you, and you'll die for them. It means when you disappear, when you just vanish one day without a word, it tears a hole in everyone who knew you." He paused, collecting himself. "We looked for him for months. Called every hospital, every jail, every chapter from here to California. Nothing. It was like he just dissolved into the air." He stopped, couldn't say what some of them had thought. "But none of us, not one single man here, knew he had a family. Knew he had a daughter. If we'd known." Harper's eyes were welling up now, tears building and building until they spilled over and ran down her dusty cheeks. Her voice came out in a whisper. He died 2 years ago." The words landed like a physical blow. Men flinched. Some turned away. The one with the silver beard made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. Another slammed his fist against his bike. The clang of metal on metal, sharp and angry and helpless. "How?" the president asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Accident," Harper said, her voice small. "At his work. He was a mechanic at the shop on 5th Street. Something fell. They said it was quick. They said he didn't suffer." She recited the words like she'd heard them 1,000 times. Like they'd been burned into her memory but never really made sense. How could gone be quick? How could gone not hurt? The president closed his eyes. A single tear escaped and ran down into his beard. When he opened his eyes again, there was something fierce there. Something determined. "He left the life to take care of you and your mama. That's why he disappeared. He didn't abandon us. He chose you. He chose being a daddy over being a brother." His voice broke. "And that's the most honorable thing a man can do." Around them, men were openly crying now. These weren't the kind of men who cried easily. These were men who'd seen bar fights and road accidents and brothers lost to prison and worse. But they were crying now because grief isn't weakness. Love isn't weakness. "What happened to your mama?" the president asked gently. "She got sick about a year after Daddy died. Cancer. She kept working as long as she could. But now she can't get out of bed. And the bills." Harper's voice wavered. "The bills just keep coming, and we sold everything else. And the only thing left is Daddy's bike. And I know Mama didn't want to sell it because it's all we have left of him. But she's dying and I can't." The words tumbled out faster and faster until they dissolved into sobs. "I can't lose her too. I can't be alone." This was the moment everything changed. The president pulled Harper into his arms. This massive man with his weathered face and his gray beard and his leather vest held this tiny girl against his chest while she cried. And he looked over her head at his brothers, and they all saw the same thing in his eyes. The same promise. The same oath. He stood up, still holding Harper's hand, and turned to face his men. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and strong and carried the kind of authority that comes from knowing, without question, that every man there would follow him into hell itself if he asked. "Mount up." What happened next was something Harper would remember for the rest of her life. The first engine roared to life. Then another. Then 3 more. Then suddenly, all at once, the air itself exploded with sound. 250 Harley-Davidson engines firing in rapid succession. Each one adding its voice to a chorus that wasn't just heard but felt. Felt in your chest. Felt in your bones. Felt in the ground beneath your feet. The noise was overwhelming. Glorious. Terrifying in its magnitude. It wasn't just sound, it was power made audible. It was fury and loyalty and brotherhood condensed into pure vibration. The kind of sound that announces that something important is happening. That the world is about to shift. That everything is about to change. Harper had never heard anything like it. Her father's single Harley had been loud. Sure, but this was different. This was an army mobilizing. This was thunder bottled and unleashed. The president scooped Harper up like she weighed nothing. He lifted her onto the seat of his bike, a massive road king with chrome that gleamed like liquid silver in the sunlight. The seat was still warm from the Texas sun, the leather soft and worn smooth from thousands of miles. "You ever been on a bike before?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the rumbling engines. Harper shook her head, her eyes wide. "Just hold on to me," he said, "and don't be scared. You're safer right now than you've ever been in your life." He climbed on in front of her, and Harper wrapped her small arms around his waist. The leather of his vest was warm and smelled like road dust and motor oil and something else she couldn't name. Something that reminded her of her father. The convoy began to form with a precision that spoke of years of riding together. The president took point, Harper sitting behind him. Then came the road captain, then the sergeant at arms. Then the rest fell into formation 2 by 2. A massive snake of chrome and steel and leather stretching back and back and back. Then they started moving. The collective roar of 250 Harleys moving together was apocalyptic. It echoed off buildings. It set off car alarms. It made windows rattle in their frames. Dogs barked. Birds took flight. The very air seemed to part before them as they rode. People stopped what they were doing. Store owners came to their doors. Cars pulled over. Pedestrians froze mid-step, their phones coming out to record what they were seeing. Because you don't see something like this every day. You don't see 250 bikers moving with purpose through residential streets, their engines synchronized, their formation tight, their faces set with determination. As they turned onto Harper Street, neighbors came out of their houses. Elderly Mrs. Chun from next door. The Rodriguez family across the street with their 5 kids. Mr. Patterson, the veteran who always flew his flag. They all emerged onto their porches and lawns, their jaws dropping as this massive convoy rolled slowly down their quiet suburban street. The ground shook. Windows rattled. The sound was so loud that it drowned out everything else. Harper's small house looked even smaller now, dwarfed by this massive show of force and loyalty and brotherhood. The president slowed, the entire convoy slowing behind him, engines still rumbling, still filling the air with sound and power. And there, in the driveway under a faded blue tarp, sat her father's Harley. The engines began to quiet. One by one, the bikers killed their engines. And in the sudden relative silence, you could hear boots hitting pavement, the creak of leather, the jingle of keys and chains. 250 men dismounting, standing in formation, their eyes all focused on one thing. The tarp-covered Harley sitting in Harper's driveway. The president helped Harper down from his bike. Her legs were shaky, from the ride, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming magnitude of what was happening. He kept his hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring, as they walked toward her driveway. The tarp was sun-faded, a blue that had once been vibrant but now looked tired, worn. The shape underneath was unmistakable. The curve of the fuel tank, the angle of the handlebars, the long, low profile of a Harley that had been built for the road and was now trapped, grounded, waiting. The president moved toward it slowly. His boots scraped against the concrete. Each step deliberate, careful, like he was approaching a grave. Behind him, the other bikers had formed a loose semicircle, giving him space but staying close. Their faces were solemn, reverent. He reached out and took hold of the tarp. His hands hesitated for just a moment, hovering over the fabric. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that large, he pulled the tarp back. The Harley emerged like a resurrection. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. The chrome was dulled by time and neglect, covered in a fine layer of Texas dust. The leather seat was cracked in places, dried out from sitting and used. The paint on the fuel tank, once glossy black, had lost some of its shine. But underneath all of that, you could see what this bike had been. What it still was. It was a road king. The same model the president rode. The same model half the men there rode. But it wasn't just any road king. The president knew this bike. He'd ridden alongside it for years. He'd watched his brother polish that exact fuel tank. He'd heard the specific engine roar to life 1,000 times. His hand reached out and touched the seat. His fingers traced the crack in the leather. "It's his," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'd know this bike anywhere." A ripple went through the crowd. Men stepping closer, craning to see. Some of them remembered the bike too. One biker, the man with the silver beard, stepped forward. "I helped him rebuild the carburetor on this bike. Summer of 2010. Took us 3 days, but when we were done, she ran like a dream." Another added, "He let me borrow this bike when mine was in the shop. Rode it to my daughter's wedding. Best man never forgets a bike like this." The president looked at Harper. "Sweetheart, your daddy loved this bike, but he loved you and your mama more. That's why he kept it. That's why he held on to it even when things got hard. Because it was his last connection to who he used to be. But you," his voice cracked, "you were who he chose to become." He turned to face his brothers. "Boys, we're not taking this bike." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. "We're fixing it. We're restoring it. We're bringing it back to life the way your daddy would have wanted." He looked at Harper. "And then we're selling it for what it's worth, what it's really worth. Every penny goes to your mama's medical bills." Then he added, his voice carrying across the assembled men, "And whatever that doesn't cover, we do. Hospital bills, rent, food, school, everything. Because that's what brothers do. And your daddy was our brother, which makes you family. And family never falls alone." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Men were already pulling out wallets. Someone was on their phone calling the hospital. Another was organizing a rotation schedule: who would stay with Harper's mother, who would handle bills, who would coordinate with doctors. "Wait," Harper said, her small voice cutting through the organized chaos. "Where's my mama?" The president's face went serious. "Let's check on her." They walked to the front door. Harper's note was still on her mother's pillow, but her mother wasn't moving, wasn't responding. The president, whose name Harper finally learned was Marcus Steele Davidson, immediately called 911 while one of the bikers who'd been a paramedic started checking vitals. "Pulse is weak, breathing shallow. She needs a hospital. Now." The ambulance arrived within minutes, but the Hells Angels convoy followed it all the way to County Memorial. And when Harper's mother was admitted to the ICU, there was already a biker in the waiting room. Then another, then 10, then 20. The hospital staff had never seen anything like it. Dozens of leather-clad bikers keeping vigil, taking shifts, making sure a woman they'd never met and a little girl who'd walked 3 miles in the heat were never, ever alone. 6 months later, Harper's mother stood in the driveway of their house, the house they no longer had to leave, watching as Steele and 15 Hells Angels brothers rolled up on their bikes. She was thinner than she'd been, but her color was back. Her eyes were bright. The cancer was in remission, the result of aggressive treatment that had been fully covered by a fund the club had established. In the driveway, gleaming like it had just rolled off the showroom floor, sat her late husband's Harley, fully restored, chrome polished to mirror perfection, engine purring, ready to ride. Steele climbed off his bike and walked over to Harper's mother, whose name was Sarah, with an envelope in his hand. "We sold the bike to a collector in California," he said. "Private sale. Guy's a Hells Angel from the San Diego chapter. He knew what it meant, what it represented. He paid $45,000. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Every penny went to your medical bills," Steele continued. "They're paid. All of them. Hospital, doctors, medications. Everything." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to." "You already did," Steele said gently. "You raised a daughter brave enough to walk 3 miles to save you. You loved a man who left us to be a better father to her. That's all the thanks we need." Harper ran up and threw her arms around Steele's waist. At 8 years old, almost 9 now, she'd gained weight, her face fuller, healthier. Her eyes bright with a future that had almost been stolen. "Can we go visit Daddy?" Harper asked. Steele nodded. "That's why we're here." The convoy, now 20 strong, rode to the cemetery where Harper's father was buried. They'd installed a new headstone, one that bore not just his name and dates, but also the Hells Angels' death head and the words, "Brother, Father, forever on the road." The bikers stood in a circle around the grave. Steele placed his hand on Harper's shoulder. "Your daddy rode with us," he said. "And now, every year on this day, we'll ride for him. We'll ride for you. We'll ride to remember that family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up when you need them most." He looked at the assembled brothers. Because sometimes angels wear leather. Sometimes heroes ride Harleys. And sometimes a little girl with her father's key reminds us all why we became brothers in the first place. Harper placed a single flower on her father's grave, a Texas bluebonnet, his favorite, and whispered, "I saved Mama, Daddy. Your brothers helped me, just like you said they would." The engines roared to life. 20 Harleys, a symphony of sound and power and loyalty. And somewhere, on some eternal road, a man who'd traded his colors for fatherhood smiled, knowing his daughter would never ride alone. Because family isn't just who you're born to. Family is who shows up when an 8-year-old girl walks 3 miles carrying nothing but hope and a key. Family is 250 engines tearing down your street when you've run out of options. Family is the people who answer a call they never expected to receive and never walk away. If this story moved you, subscribe and comment "Family never falls alone" to honor every person who's ever shown up for a stranger in need. Share with someone who needs to remember that real heroes exist, and sometimes they ride Harleys. Motorcycle Red Heart.